This episode is made possible by our generous patrons.
Welcome to episode 130 of the Inktofilm podcast, where we read the book
And then see the movie.
I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
And this week, we discuss the middle third of JRR Tolkien's The Return of the King.
Oh, that was a little weird. Maybe a little late to the party April Fool's magic there.
Yeah, I think there was like a helium leak in here or something. My voice went a little high for a minute there. Here we are in April. We've made it through March. Actually, today it's the final day of March. We're recording this, but we've made it. And hopefully April looks a little better in the world. All signs point to no. But here we are.
Yeah, it's been rough, but we're all trucking along, hopefully.
Yeah, how are you feeling?
Better than last week. I wouldn't say I'm all the way back to normal, but better than last week for sure.
That's good. Yeah, well, I mean, and we talked a little bit last week about how we thought you might have been exposed and maybe even had the coronavirus, and your symptoms were pretty mild. I do want to make it clear that we know that is not the case for everybody.
Right. Well, my girlfriend's an example of somebody who we almost went to the ER because she was having difficulty breathing. So
yeah, and even that it can get much worse. Clearly.
Yeah, definitely. And just to I guess kind of check back in on that, her company has contacted her and confirmed that there were 27 cases of confirmed positive coronavirus people that were staying at her hotel during the time that she was working. So there's a really high likelihood that that's exactly what we ended up with. But, there were no tests to take, so we can't confirm it.
Yeah, the testing's still a problem, regardless of what I might see in certain press circles. It seems clear that there are not enough tests, but hopefully that's something that's being worked on. Today we're going to be talking about the middle section of The Return of the King, which has quite a lot of big moments in it, honestly. It feels like almost the rest of it, but I know there is a good bit of wrapping up, and then also I've heard about the Scouring of the Shire, although I've never actually read it. So I know that that's something that I'm going to be getting in this third chunk here next week as we actually wrap this book up. But this middle section just has a lot of really memorable moments and stuff I've been looking forward to, honestly, since we started The Lord of the Rings. This is big moments in this chunk.
I would say that the main climax of the story finishes in the second part of Return of the King. I think across multiple fronts, kind of. There's only one really lingering thing and then some wrap-up to do for the third part, and we're also going to be doing some appendices as well, just to kind of have the context and maybe talk about it as well for part 3. Yeah. So stay tuned for that stuff.
Oh, hey, I wanted to give a quick update. We weren't able to get a Patreon episode out this week, or this month for our patrons, bonus episode, but we are planning to do 2 instead in April. And we decided what they're going to be. We're going to do the film Tolkien that came out a little while ago. That's like a biopic about JRR Tolkien. We'll do that one first, I think, earlier on in April. And then later on in April, we're going to release a episode on the animated Return of the King feature from, I think, the 70s or 80s. Not really sure when it came out. Go back and watch that. Maybe we'll even watch that right before we watch Peter Jackson's film. Not sure. Maybe after. I don't know. Probably depends on our schedule.
I think after would make more sense. But yeah, I guess it just depends on how the month shakes out. But I'm excited this whole month of Tolkien that we have coming up. And we have one more book episode and then the film episode. And I just can't wait to just dig into all the appendices and start doing all the research for that third movie and just kind of put the cap on our coverage here. It's going to be really bittersweet, but I'm so happy to be back in Tolkien.
Yeah.
And Middle-earth.
We were talking a lot about just sort of, I mean, we're going to get into it when we get into watch this biopic, which I've seen, by the way. I watched it on a plane, and I'm excited to watch it again in better circumstances, on a better TV. And I was thinking a lot about Tolkien's background and how he fought in World War I, we've talked about. Literally lost two of his best friends at I think the Battle of the Somme. I might be inaccurate about when exactly, but during the war. And I think that was really present in my mind as I was reading this last section, or this middle section here, especially a lot of the descriptions of Mordor, and just the brutality of a lot of the battles. I was thinking a lot about the trench warfare and how just churned up and destroyed everything got, and just nasty too, because there's all these bodies, because it was too dangerous often to pull bodies out of the zone between trenches, right? Because it was too dangerous. There was always no man's land. So there's literally just bodies out there rotting for months and months and piling up. And then when you have to like advance, you're literally running over the corpses of your friends who have died out there in the middle because you can't stop and do anything about it. And, you can't even bury them because it's getting shelled constantly, and like literally corpses are getting churned out of the earth. So really dark stuff. And this is something that he lived through and he fought in. I don't know how long he spent on the front, but I know he did spend some time there. And to come out of that and to write this series, which is ultimately very hopeful, right? About the sort of triumphing of good over evil. I don't know, I was just thinking a lot about that.
To stay to have your compass still point north and like to still see like that there's good in the world after going through something like that, and really writing a story that represents that is pretty amazing. There was a moment in the reading that we were doing when when Sam and Frodo were kind of sneaking by some like locals to Mordor. There were like humans and some people in like little I don't even know what the villages or something like that they were sneaking by, or not even necessarily villages, but just groups of people that were like living out there. And when they were kind of sneaking by and moving around, I was just thinking of how it feels to be in like a foreign country, for how it would have felt for someone like Tolkien in a foreign country. Although, I don't know where he fought in the war.
Well, the Somme, I believe, is in France.
Yeah, just this idea of like, there are people who like actually living in the country that wars are being fought in, and like just the way that they're just like outsiders, and these people are like a faceless enemy until you see that there are like also civilians of this country, and there are, you know what I mean, there aren't just the soldiers. And so I know that I think these people weren't necessarily civilians in Mordor. They were kind of like working towards the war effort, like creating stuff.
He definitely says that there are slaves. There are orcs and goblins and people even that are being sort of driven by these slave masters to fight the war and to work in the war effort, but they're not necessarily themselves like believers in the cause, right. Which is a little bit of complexity and sort of nuance to the situation that I hadn't really considered.
Yeah, I mean, it stuck out to me because it's kind of a scene that doesn't happen in the films either, where they're not running into villages of orcs or people or anything really. They're running into forces like armies and things like that, but never like villages off the beaten path as they're trying to make their way. So that stuck out to me. Just thinking about what it represented to Tolkien. He famously the dislike for allegory, but as we've talked about in the last episode, what things represent to him, whether it was specifically about World War I or not,
or two. I mean, because he wrote this during. Well, I mean, he wrote it for years. Like, this is something he worked on for a really, really long time. Right. And he fought in the First World War, but then during the Second World War, he was still working on this book. So I think it's clear to me that affected him too. I couldn't help but think of it. When some of the parts we're getting to here, I'll mention some of my specifics, but I kept making some comparisons and going, oh, this is kind of like this, and when this happened. And ultimately, if you could even look at the ring as sort of a stand-in for like nuclear power, if you wanted to, right? Like the ultimate power that is trying to be wielded by people who are good, quote unquote, but yet they can't because it corrupts them, and it's too deadly a power that it cannot be wielded. So if you look at it, literally, it's like nuclear war as that, which was unleashed on the world in World War II. I don't know. There's a lot there, and I can see why you might be resistant to it, because if you hear it too much as an author, you might think, ultimately you're going to put my book in a box that I don't necessarily want it to be in and say that this is all it is, which we've talked about. But I don't think that it's invalid in any way to look at it, recognize the time this guy lived in, the things he was encountering, and see that there are some examples where it was probably influenced by it.
Right, at least reflections or your influences of how he was feeling as he was writing it. There is somebody I want to dig into really quickly before we get into the plot here. I wanted to know what you think that Gollum represents, if we like extrapolate him out and maybe think of it as like something symbolic. Like, is there something there for you? Because I was really trying to figure out like if there was some sort of connection between something else other than just the character in the book. Like if there's something that he represents within the story.
That's an excellent question. What does Gollum represent for Lord of the Rings? I think I'm going to table that for now. I'm going to think on that a little bit. Maybe if something comes to me while we're recording, I'll voice it. But otherwise, maybe we can revisit that next week after I get some time to think on it. I think there is something there to him. It's not something I've given a lot of thought about. It's funny because I've thought about other symbolic meanings for other characters and other things in the story. But I'm not. I guess I'm not ready. Do you have a theory that you want to propose?
Not really, because I had been thinking on it and trying to figure out, just like what other than like showing what the corruption looks like and showing like what the ultimate extreme of like this sort of self, like only caring about the self and only striving for whatever that one goal is, and killing everyone else in your path and that kind of thing, just having like that singular mind. Other than representing that to the story, I couldn't see any sort of like symbolic representation of like or at least an allegory to anything else.
Right. Yeah, and like I agree. You could see the ways he's working in the story. Like he is sort of a foil for Frodo. He's sort of the opposite. He's someone who has been twisted by the ring beyond repair, and has given into it in a way that Frodo really doesn't. And in some ways, he's sort of the weaker of the two, like the version of Frodo if he didn't have the will, if he didn't have Sam's help. Things like that you could see reflected. Also just time, spent more time being sort of twisted by it. But that's all more like on the character level and how it's operating within the story, like you said. So yeah, I'll think more about what he might mean metaphorically. If anybody wants to weigh in before we record next week, if you're listening to this, the week it comes out, send us an email. What does Gollum represent in sort of an allegorical way? And any of them that I really like, I'll definitely touch on next week.
Cool.
All right, so if you are ready, I'm going to read some summary so we can get into some specifics. Last we left off, the Battle of Pelennor Fields had wrapped up, and we are getting to chapter 7 of book 5, which is called the Pyre of Denethor. So we're going to be back with Denethor and sort of the armies. I know, like in the reading, we got to Sam and Frodo, but we have to first revisit that part of the book and sort of put a cap on all of this. And at the Pyre of Denethor chapter, Denethor goes mad and tries to burn Faramir alive, who he believes is dead. He is saved by Gandalf. Denethor then sets fire to himself, and they discover that Denethor has been using a palantir. So, yeah, a lot happens in this chapter. We see Pippin finally convince Gandalf to come and address the situation with Denethor and Faramir. Once he convinces him, like, no, he's going to kill Faramir. This is happening now, and if you don't do anything about it, it's going to be too late. One
of the tragedies of it is that after the fact, Gandalf realizes that, like, we're seeing a king fall in order to, like, kind of stop a mad king. Like, so we're stopping Denethor, and because of that, Gandalf has to leave the battlefield where he was confronting the Witch King. In that way, leaving Theoden to fight the Witch King basically on his own, with his army and everything. The king that had fallen to Sauron's influence, like being the one that Gandalf has to run to stop him from doing something mad, because like that's the failure of men. Whereas like the righteous king who like had gone through the struggles of being somewhat controlled by Sauron but overcome it, ends up dying because he confronts this ultimate evil. And he dies like a glorious, righteous death, whereas like Denethor is like a coward.
Talking about Theoden.
Theoden, yeah, and yeah. Whereas Denethor is dying a coward's death, with unfortunately drawing Gandalf's sort of power to him instead. I
will say that Gandalf ascribes a lot of this to the ring. and not to the ring, to Sauron and the ring, I guess, all of it, right? Like he says, the Dark Lord is his influence is felt even here, and it's influencing everything. And it did make me laugh because I had this thought of like Gandalf someone saying like, "Oh, what's that smell?" And Gandalf saying, "The Dark Lord's influence gets us even here." Like he just
constantly, no matter what happens.
It's like he blames everything on it.
Pippin's like running around. He like stubs his toe. He's like, "The Dark Lord again."
The Dark Lord's influence has struck my toe. Yeah, no, it's funny. I kept thinking like maybe Denethor is just insane and kind of a shithead, but Gandalf ascribes it all to Sauron, which is, well,
once we learn that like the influence of the Palantirs is there, then we know like it is Sauron's influence even more directly than we would have thought.
Right. Yeah. No. But I mean, it's beyond that. I think it's like when he sees people who are despairing, he's like, the Dark One has made them despair. Like it's like exactly. Everything. But anyway, it just in this particular chapter, I thought it was kind of funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, clearly it does seem that the Dark One has this sort of masterful power to affect people's morale and creep into people's minds and twist them and all of that. Sauron is definitely very powerful. So one of our favorite side characters, Baragond, is in here sort of defending or fighting off the people who are trying to light the pyre or something. Like he's slowing this whole process down, and he basically has saved Faramir in the intervening time. He's even kills a few people who are in there trying to do Denethor's bidding.
Yeah, and crazy enough, Denethor's when Gandalf arrives, Denethor says Faramir's already dead. He's basically saying he's already burned him. And the argument goes on, and eventually Gandalf is like, "Fuck this," and he like uses some of his power and like jumps in and like grabs Faramir, and he's like Pippin's surprised at how strong he is for being so old and all that. Pulls him off the pyre, and then soon after, Denethor like jumps out, grabs a torch from one of the servants, and like jumps on the pyre with the torch, killing himself.
Burns himself.
But not before. I think he and Gandalf have an interesting kind of exchange where, and this is something that I keep seeing, is that Gandalf, and we may have even addressed this before, but the way that Gandalf approaches a lot of these obstacles within the story is like he doesn't immediately go to his power and like he's always trying to convince people and give people chances. Sure. And like Theoden's a prime example of that. Like he didn't use any of his abilities to try to pull Theoden back to the light side at first. Trying to give him sort of that choice to come back.
Seems like a last resort for Gandalf often, right?
Which is interesting because he is, he talks about like things that he can see in the future, kind of like, and he's here to like be sort of a bastion for like the side of good. And yet he doesn't want to be like the direct influence. It seems like he's like just one of these guiding forces. Yeah.
But here he sort of rescues Faramir. Denethor lights himself on fire, and we hear about this Palantir. And it's interesting because I don't remember if this happens in the movie or not. Something I've forgotten, which I'm sure you probably remember, but don't tell me because I'll get it for the first time when I watch. But I was wondering if this is trying to say something about propaganda, again, making the allegory. Because he sort of hears all these lies when using this Palantir, and Gandalf says your mind's been twisted by all this, the word of Sauron. And I kept thinking like, is that the influence of like propaganda in listening to corrupt leaders and their lies?
I totally think you're onto something there, because I think Gandalf himself even says something in the text about like sort of like getting the knowledge, like this idea of knowledge versus like wisdom, you know what I mean? Like so taking something, the prime example being, I think this is what the argument Gandalf makes. He saw in the Palantir, he saw the sails of the enemy on the ships coming, and he knew that they were coming. But so he had that little tidbit, he had the little piece of knowledge, but he didn't have sort of the wherewithal or like the macro vision of it in order to see that it could be any number of circumstances. He saw the enemy's flags and just took it for what it was, not realizing that he was getting a vision of Aragorn coming.
Right. Yeah. So there's even that. Sort of, that's the famous thing with prophecy has always been that, the context is stripped away and you're just seeing something and you don't know what it means. So yeah, that could be going on here. All right. So chapter 8 is called The Houses of Healing. Merry, Faramir, Éowyn, and many others are injured and placed in the houses of healing. Aragorn uses King's Foil to help treat the injured. So this was an interesting section here because it was very like the recovery after the battle is over. And we see sort of the effect it's had. And we start off with Merry and Pippin meeting in the field. And Pippin sort of helping Merry, whose arm is all damaged from holding the sword that stabbed the Witch King. And Merry like collapses weeping at one point, and it was an affecting scene. I feel bad for these hobbits, and you can just see the weight of everything they've been through weighing on them, and seeing each other now after everything, I think is a pretty dramatic moment. Yeah,
it makes me also think of when Frodo is stabbed by the blade of one of the Nazgul, yeah. Like how it affects him, and just thinking of like, oh, if he were, how would it affect him quite as severely if he was a man? And just like this idea that like Merry stabbed the Witch King, and just the stabbing sort of like sent something through the sword and like damaged his, like made his arm like numb or damaged or something, and he can't really walk very well right now, and like just like the effort of having.
I think it's just the evil of the Witch King. I think.
Yeah,
I think that would have happened to anybody.
You think so? Like
maybe,
to that extent?
I think so.
Yeah, because I feel like you see Aragorn, cut down somebody like this in a moment of glory. I don't think you necessarily see,
but not the Witch King. I think the Witch King is supposed to be special, like especially evil, especially powerful, and just Éowyn's sort of sickness that she's being affected by is similar, right? Like both of them have this.
Yeah. And then a lot of people are have been poisoned by the arrows of the Sauron's men. So I guess my example that I'm kind of thinking of is so Isildur cuts off the finger of Sauron and then seemingly kills him and defeats him. I guess we don't have that close perspective to know whether he dealt with any sort of injury or anything like that. But it just seems like the hobbits and I guess Éowyn in this situation as well are taking just the act of having killed something this evil is taking a toll on them that I feel like maybe we wouldn't have seen in a different character.
Honestly, I don't know the answer to that. I don't think anyone could know other than Tolkien. If Aragorn had stabbed the Witch King, would the same thing have happened to him? I don't know. That's a good question. I guess I took it to be more just that was the particular evil stain of this being. Maybe even Sauron doesn't have the same effect because he's a different sort of thing, and plus he wasn't killed, whereas this is killing this creature. So I don't know. It's a good question, but I don't know the answer to it. But so we're getting into a part here that I think is interesting because Aragorn is sort of really reluctant to claim that he's the king, right? And I think it's smart. He's kind of he's being political. He's I'm not going to enter the city, unless I have to. I don't want to come in with an army. I want to respect the regency, all this stuff, right? And then we hear this prophecy or old saying about a king he has healing hands, and then there's sort of the clever twist of he knows about this herb that when he was a ranger that you could use to help heal poison. And he says, well, we should give that to them. And so he has them go collect this herb, and they give it to the people who've been poisoned, and they give it to Merry, and they give it to Éowyn, and it has this miraculous sort of healing power, and it's sort of come true that he is this healing king. And I don't see how you can't look at a king who heals and sort of, I don't know. This was very Christ allegory to me too, even though I know Gandalf is typically the one who's more in that role here, but the healing king, I don't know, it definitely made me think of that.
Yeah, I agree. It was just sort of this being that...
It felt biblical.
Definitely. No one else was going to be able to heal these people, and I agree with you. It is just sort of that idea that, a savior who comes in and heals people that seemingly couldn't be healed and, were suffering from an illness they didn't understand or whatever. I agree. I felt some of that as well.
Yeah. I did think it was funny that when Merry woke up, he really wants some of the halfling weed. He's like, man, I really need some of that sweet kush.
And yet what's great, he was willing to give it up because of the death of Theoden, which I thought was pretty, he was something about how he would give it up. He would never be able to smoke again without thinking of Theoden, because that was kind of their last conversation, was talking about sitting and telling stories and smoking together. And then I think it's Gandalf who says like, no, but smoke and rejoice and think of him when you smoke, and like sort of like have it be a celebration. Pretty affecting that like.
And then he gives him his medical marijuana card.
Exactly.
He says, you were injured.
Yeah.
And we hear about Aragorn literally going out amongst the people and healing them with this poison healing herb.
And this is another moment of like sort of playing. I know that like within like we know the context of everything that's going on, but seemingly to everyone else, Aragorn has powers again. Like he, you know what I mean? Something like otherworldly for these people.
It is interesting how like the role is of a sort of magical healer, yet the explanation is more mundane than that.
Yeah.
You know?
I love that it comes from his ranger background too. It's just like so fitting.
Yeah, and I don't know if that. I wonder what that's trying to say. Like I don't think it takes away from the act.
No,
but it's interesting that everybody sort of believes that something mystical is happening. And is he just saying something about like how people are and how we ascribe things, you know, like mystical power or mystical meanings, even if they aren't necessarily, or maybe he's saying that they do actually have it, even though they might not appear that way.
Right.
I don't know.
Like, and I think it's made more powerful by the fact that it was this prophecy, like this prophecy of old, that like, oh, when eventually the king does come, he'll have healing hands and this sort of thing. They've been waiting so long for the king of Gondor to return, and this is like the moment, and the healing lines up. So, yeah, I mean, I think it all fits together nicely.
And that rolls us right into the next chapter, which is called The Last Debate. And this chapter begins with Legolas and Gimli coming into Minas Tirith and sort of throwing shade on the whole area, talking about how, it needs some more trees, and it needs some more this and that. Like they're sort of unimpressed in many ways, or like slightly impressed but not too impressed, which I thought was funny.
I thought it was nice that they're like, when Aragorn comes to power, we'll send the best builders, and we'll send trees that'll never die.
We'll fix this up. Yeah, we'll fix this place up. So Gimli and Legolas come and meet Merry and Pippin again, and the captains of the West hold a council on their next action. They decide to send 7,000 men against Mordor to march on the Black Gate. So again, this is a place where we see Aragorn being very hesitant to claim the throne. He's sort of playing the game. He doesn't want to come in and seem like a conquering, you know what I mean, like a conqueror. He wants to come in and have the will of the people.
I will say that I think in the last chapter, Faramir wakes up and immediately names him king. And he takes the title, and he is
everybody
king.
Else wants him to be king. Everybody wants him to be.
But he isn't like immediately sitting on the throne and being like, I'm now the king, let's take all the forces and everything. Yeah. Like he's still kind of strategically deciding how they have like a secret meeting where it's like Elrond's sons and himself, and I think Gandalf and maybe a few other people. And they're just talking about like what they can do at this point. And, you know, it's decided that like, although it could be suicide, they're going to send 7,000 men to draw the eye of Sauron, to draw Sauron's attention from the hope that you know, Frodo, because that's their hope of winning, because they're outnumbered. I think like they say like 10 times and then 10 times more or something like that. So they just can't. They could never contend with the numbers. They're just going to have to beat him in a more direct way.
So I want to touch again on the Army of the Dead, because it gets talked about here a little bit as Gimli sort of tells the story of what happened. And the Army of the Dead helped them to kill the mariners who were going to be on this fleet and drive them away in fear. Unclear whether or not they were killed. They cast themselves into the water, like out of just sheer terror. Because it says that they have these pale swords that Gimli wasn't even sure were going to be able to like stab anybody, but then they didn't have to because everyone was so afraid.
Right.
So it's a very different sort of interaction than what we later see in the movie, but I won't get to that just yet. But it is interesting because there's like these slaves that were like tied to the oars on the boats who can't flee because they're tied down, and then they get liberated, and then they decide they're going to keep on rowing as free men now. Right. So, you know, there's some savior stuff going on here, but I was trying to figure out what like the dead really represent, because I was thinking more about like Tolkien and fighting in the First World War and all the death he has seen in his life. Like, you know, he would have lived through the Spanish flu, like, you know, we talked about, you know, speaking of pandemics. And the dead come to fight for the cause of the living in this book. And what does that, like, what is he trying to say with that, I guess?
So, I'm trying to suss this out as we go because I hadn't really thought all that much about that. But so I think there's something interesting to think about. So they're ghosts. So you can think of like ghosts of the past. And you can think of like the sins of the father affecting the lineage and all that kind of thing. I think potentially it's like this sort of, I think they represent maybe people who are allied with an Axis power, allied with whoever at some point, and realize they're of their ways, turning to maybe come to the aid at the correct time, and maybe it being a pivotal moment. I do also, I was thinking about the dead, and it's also kind of stated in the book, this idea that like these are just men that were cursed, right? So they're not really necessarily some they are magical beings or whatever now because they've been cursed and they're ghosts clearly. But they were just men who became cursed, and they terrify the evil of Sauron. Maybe not Sauron, but like his men. So they don't even have to fight. They run in terror. So like evil running in terror is something else I think that the ghosts represent, is like sort of, I don't know, making evil, showing that like they aren't this like stalwart evil sort of like thing that can't be wavered, and they can be affected by fear and things like that.
Well, and fear is what I was sort of zeroing in on in my reading of this, and this is where I was making my strongest World War II allegories here in this section, because I was thinking about how the people of these ships were said to be like from the east, and they were coming to fight, and that still the east is mobilizing to fight in this war, and the terror of the dead stops the attack. They get this sort of navy and they come and defend. And I was thinking about how, during World War II, the nuclear bomb was dropped. And one of, not only was it the power of destroying, the cities, but like it was almost a terrorist act, and that it was designed to frighten the Japanese to their very core so that they would give up. It was almost a morale thing, like, right? Like you can't stand against this power. And it's literally harnessing death, right? Like I am become death, destroyer of worlds, kind of deal. And here you're seeing literally the army of the dead being used in a similar way. And it's sort of a battle of fear. And then it's a one-time event, and then it's gone, right? Like the power is no longer there. The army of the dead leaves. And I don't know. I mean, again, Tolkien wouldn't like this. He wouldn't like us making this comparison, but there was just enough dots connecting for me. It's kind of messy. It's not all one-to-one, like it probably should be. But I don't know. I was seeing a little bit of that, and I don't think it's said to like condone any of these acts or something. It's just I think it's interesting that this is the time he was living in. He was seeing these events play out, in his day-to-day life, and maybe some of that got into this work. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, you just reminded me that we spoke about the army of the dead in the battle with Theoden and everybody at Minas Tirith, but they're not.
And I'm not even sure. Did they actually fight in that battle?
I don't believe that they did because
so I think I just assumed they were there and they weren't really talked about that much.
Yeah, well, I did the same. Like I thought that because I think I don't know if we had the context.
He was there. He was at the head of a host. Like they had an army with them, and I think I assumed it was the dead. And
it's just the Dunedain, apparently.
But it was just the Dunedain, and then some of these free men, I think, that they freed.
Yeah, so Aragorn releases them from their oath and says that their oath has been fulfilled and everything. So they, after this sort of like overtaking of the fleet, I think they go away. Yeah.
So even less of a sort of dramatic battle turning moment here in the book, plays out a little differently for sure. So yeah, let's get to this plan. So this plan is a bold one by Gandalf. He essentially says, what we need to do is go in and have no hope, just a head-on assault of the Black Gate, and we have no chance of winning this. But the only reason we're going to do it is we have to draw the eye so that Frodo and Sam can complete their mission. And he doesn't even really talk a lot about like what exactly the mission is. I don't know. Like he doesn't want to say too much, right?
Right. Well, I think the people who need to know.
Exactly. Right? I think exactly. Yeah. But you have 7,000 men going to do this. So you know what I mean? Not everybody knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
And they're going on this sort of suicide mission. It's a bold plan. I think it fits the moment. And I like that these people all come together and say like, yeah, it might not work. In fact, it probably won't. We're probably all going to die. But if we just stay here, we're going to die anyway, because they know about the massive forces that are arraying against them.
Right. The alternative is to do, I think it's said in the book, the alternative is to do basically what Man and Denethor and everybody had been doing up to that point, is just hole up and delay the inevitable for as long as possible. Or, push and try to draw the attention of Sauron, and hopefully, they don't even, there's no updates for Frodo and Sam. They have no idea, like, if they've been taken or anything yet, which comes to play a part here in a second. Yeah.
I thought it was kind of funny at the end of this chapter, Gandalf unsheathes his sword and holds it up, and he says, "You shall not be sheathed again until the last battle is fought." And I was like, cut to like 10 minutes later as he's like walking down the hallways holding it, getting on his horse, trying to mount while holding this sword. He's like, "Ah, fucking all right," and he sheathes it. It was more metaphorical.
Yeah. But was it, for some reason, I thought it was Aragorn who drew the sword and said that, but... Right.
I think it was, because it was Anduril, wasn't it? Yeah, so I think you're right. All right. Apologies to Gandalf if I got that one wrong. He's not the one who's walking around with the sword out.
Regardless, Aragorn's walking down the halls, dragging the tip of his sword from behind him, and he's like, "I don't want to hold this up anymore."
Or he's like accidentally stabbing people as he turns around because he won't put it away. It's like, just put the sword away.
It's on his shoulder. He's walking around with it on his shoulder,
whapping people in the head. Yeah. Anyway, so chapter 10 is called "The Black Gate Opens." The army, with Gandalf, Aragorn, Gimli, Legolas, and Pippin, but not Merry, marches to the Black Gate. The Mouth of Sauron comes out to discuss terms and presents tokens, which are owned by Frodo. He then departs, and the army of Mordor attacks them. Okay, so that's the little summary. Let's break it down. We have, first off, Merry being told that he has to stay behind. This time, I kind of get it. I mean, he's still kind of injured. His arm still isn't working very well. I think he's starting to get some feeling back in it, but it's still a problem. And he's told he needs to stay behind with Burgle. And it seems like he also has this, like, he's achieved this great feat. Like, he's done something that, like, no one else can touch right now. And Pippin has this feeling of, like, I got to go do something to equal what Merry did, because he had this crazy moment where he helped defeat the Witch King.
I think that is something that Gandalf says as well. I think he says something along the line to Merry in order to tell him not to come, just saying, like, you've already done enough. Glory. And like, if you did nothing else, like, you've already done enough. And then, later, I think Pippin is like, well, Merry killed the Witch King. Like, what do I need to do?
I need to step it up. I do like that as they're approaching, they're just like blowing trumpets and announcing that the king has come, because they're trying to like draw all the attention they can. There's also a nice moment where I think Aragorn shows some good leadership, where they discuss how there's certain number of the troops that are despairing over their situation and are like getting ready to flee, and he instead like reassigns them to go help out in another area. He like gives them another mission that'll take them away from Mordor, realizing that they, whether they're too young or they don't understand the moment or they don't understand what they're doing or they don't have any belief in it. He finds a way to like use these troops of his to still do something worthwhile and not just have them flee. And I think it was a smart moment to show Aragorn being like a capable leader here in the field.
Yeah, he's like a merciful king. He doesn't want people to. And the other thing is like,
right, he doesn't punish them for being afraid. Right.
Right. And the other thing is like you said, being a good leader, like even having soldiers like that on the battlefield could be poisonous to the other soldiers and stuff. And just like realizing like it's just better overall to be sort of like somebody who rolls with the punches rather than like just like a brick wall and telling people what to do, that kind of thing. So yeah, good moment of seeing him kind of becoming a good king, seemingly. Mm-hmm. Hopefully, we're hoping he'll be.
Yeah. So how about the Mouth of Sauron, man? This guy is he's something. He was a character. He's apparently he's a man, and he just works for Sauron.
Right, and I always thought that it was more of a creature sort of manifestation of Sauron. No, but it's just a guy who like works his way up the ranks. Yeah.
Yeah. And he has some personality to him, Like right. he's clearly got, aspirations to be like the leader He implies that he will be the sort of lord overseeing all of the realms of men. And we get the offer here from Sauron of like, we're going to leave you guys. You can just stay here. This whole area is going to be ours, but we'll leave you here to govern yourselves. You just have to like pay a tithe to us, and ultimately you're under our fealty. It's like saying we're going to create this empire, and it's trying to give them an out. Like, if you take this, it won't be as bad. We're not just going to wipe you all out in some sort of mass genocide. Right. And then they get the impression that this guy is going to be the one that they would answer to. Again, he's quite a character. He's all full of bluster, but then like Aragorn stares at him for a minute, and then all of a sudden he's like, "Oh, don't kill me! I'm just the messenger," or whatever.
Right.
Like even though Aragorn doesn't say anything.
And there's the moment of he becomes fearful after sort of there's like an exchange that goes on. He brings out obviously the Sam's sword, I think. Frodo's elven cloak, and then the thing of Mithril, armor of Mithril.
And we don't know how he got those at this point in the book, so it's this moment of like, huh?
Oh, you're saying like we didn't know that he had them. We know how he got them.
Well, we didn't. I guess we hadn't seen exactly that those had gotten taken and where they had gone and like how they got there. I guess because we don't know the fate of Frodo yet, because where we last left him, he had been captured. So we don't know, and we know that we know that this is an advanced timeline from last we touched in with Frodo and Sam. So this moment sort of implies something has gone on that we don't know about.
Right, yeah, you're correct.
And maybe it's that they've been killed.
Yeah. We talked about how this entire book here, the book 5 of Lord of the Rings, it has been nothing but Aragorn and Gandalf and Theoden and all of their journey. And I was assuming that most of the next book was going to be Sam and Frodo, but I think up to where we got, Sam and Frodo's journey is like nearly over. There's just some wrapping up to do. So Return of the King really is the Return of the King. It's like very little Sam and Frodo. I think it has something to do with the fact that the Shelob stuff at the end of Two Towers kind of throws everything from what I'm most accustomed to, which is the movies. And so like thinking of how little there actually is of Sam and Frodo. There's only 3 chapters, and then there'll be some other ones coming up here.
Yeah, I think we'll yeah. But you're right. I mean, there's a lot that happens in the 3 chapters in the next part of the book, which we'll get to. And I would just say quality over quantity.
Yeah. No, I think these are, and I think they're quality chapters for sure.
Yeah.
But so to talk about the Mouth of Sauron again real quick, this moment of fear that he shows and like sort of flees after they're like, no deal. He like offers the Sauron deal where, they would have to pay fealty. They're like, Gandalf is like, no fucking way, we're not taking that deal. And then he like runs away and is like, don't kill the messenger, like you said again. Yeah. And then
he's got some personality to him. I like it.
Yeah, and so the Gandalf basically says like, you better get the fuck out of here because the whole like don't kill the messenger thing is about to be null and void. Yeah, we're gonna kill you in a second.
Exactly.
So he takes off, and
then the trap is sprung. Right. Apparently they were always planning to spring this trap, and as soon as he runs into the gates, all these army comes pouring out, and the Nazgul come flying in, and there's just a massive attack.
Well, and they're surrounded from all sides too, from seemingly all sides, and they have airborne enemies.
Yeah, they're like springing out of the rocks in the mountains and stuff.
Which I think in the minds of the characters is a good thing, right? They're like, good. We didn't want just like the front force. I mean, they're
yes and no. I think it's the plan. I don't know how good it is as they're surrounded by enemies.
I'm just saying, if it had just been the forces coming out of the Black Gate, they'd be like, well, we didn't really draw his eye all that much, but they are surrounded. Yeah. You can tell that Sauron's full attention is on this battle.
Right, which was the plan. And that's where we leave them. We do get, I should say, Pippin kills a cave troll, and then we leave.
Right, which is, again, badass. It's
pretty cool. Oh, he hears some eagles, which is important, I guess, for what's going to happen in the future. He hears some eagles, and he said, as he's like getting knocked out or something, he hears eagles, and he says, wait, is this Bilbo's story? Which I don't know if that's like lampshading of the fact that famously The Hobbit ends with eagles coming, and he's doing it again here. But, Or maybe it's just a sort of a narrative harmony, an echo of a previous, story. That's we'll be generous and say that.
I was gonna say, I feel like it's probably that, but the eagle, like he hears people saying the eagles are coming, which is I think probably verbatim what is said in The Hobbit, right? I think it's literally like, the eagles are coming is like a famous line. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see whenever we cover The Hobbit, like how much these reflect each other.
Yeah, looking forward to that at some point. So. here we are, book 6, which is the final of the 6 books of the Lord of the Rings. Let's get into it. Chapter 1 is called The Tower of Ungul, or Cirith Ungul. I'm not really sure how to pronounce that. And basically this whole chapter is just Sam infiltrating the Orc Tower to find Frodo.
Yeah, but it's got some twists and turns to it. Couple of things. So Sam has the ring. So he's feeling the burden of the ring while also kind of like envisioning this glorious warrior Samwise
I liked that. Samwise the gardener or whatever.
And then getting kind of the embodiment of that with the shadow that's shown on the wall that scares off the orc. I just think that's super cool symbolism, and like this idea of like he is this character that he's like envisioning himself as. He literally is that like Samwise the brave warrior that like he's not doing it necessarily in battle, but he's like one of the biggest heroes. So to see him sort of get that the long shadow that he casts is such a good metaphor for like I would argue he is the biggest hero of this entire series. I think he has to be.
Yeah, I mean he is resisting the sort of power of the ring. He can feel it; it's a burden, and he can hear it calling to him, but he's resisting it.
Yeah, and then so he scares them, and then he's got the cojones to start singing in this on his way up the tower. He's like singing a song, and the orcs are like, "Shut the fuck up down there!" And he's like, "I'm an elf warrior or whatever."
Yeah, an elf warrior. Yeah, he has this idea that he's this deadly elf warrior, and it seems like a lot of the orcs in the area have bought into it, and they think that's what he is.
Yeah. A great chapter in my opinion. I love it. And
so when he finally finds Frodo, he comes up there. I think there's Gorbag and Shagrat. I don't know. I think it's Gorbag.
Okay.
Anyway, these orcs have fought each other. There's this mad battle as they're fighting over Frodo's things, I think. And is this the mithril? Is this the items that ends up getting to the Mouth of Sauron? Is that these items that they were fighting over?
I think so, because we find when Sam finds Frodo's naked, and he's been like seemingly tortured and asked for information and all this stuff. So I think over time they were collecting all this stuff, and I think it's only after they've escaped that the orcs and everybody in the tower realize like the importance of these people that were here. I think they realized.
Well, and a lot of people are dead. He comes in and there's just dead bodies everywhere.
Right.
They've literally fought them, like they've all killed each other in this crazy battle. And again, it's like I'm like, what does this mean, right? It's this greed that has overcome them, and they're fighting amongst themselves. And maybe it's just like saying something about how greed is such a terrible motivator that it's gonna turn on itself or something.
I think there's like a contrast between Sam being able to kind of push back and repress this sort of call from the ring, because it's love, right? Like he's just like full of like duty and love for his friend Frodo, and I think that he's like a juxtaposition of these other people who, if they got their hands on the ring, all they would see is the glory, all they would see is the power, and all they would see is like, it kind of reminds me of the mirror of Erised from Harry Potter. This sort of like the Dumbledore's riddle is like, if the only people who could get the Philosopher's Stone are the people who would want it but never use it. So sort of like the idea that like Sam wants the ring because he wants to destroy it, but he would never use it for the sort of glory, and like how that juxtaposes to the people who are and Sauron, I think, is the ultimate representation of that, is like just all he can think about is himself and like power and selfishness and what he can do to grow his power and that kind of thing. And I think that's one of the ultimate morals of this story is this sort of idea that like, as cliched as like the love or like friendship, things like that are more powerful than sort of like thinking of what you can do alone. And like, even if you're the most powerful person by yourself, two people who are together and they have that bond could potentially best you, or in the way that Sam and Frodo do.
Yeah, I like that. And just you talking about the ring again just makes me think about in something about what you said about like the people who are possessing it. And can you imagine in World War II if Hitler and the Germans had developed the nuclear bomb first?
No, I mean, there's a lot of shows and stuff. I feel like I'm sure there's a lot of literature written about it.
Well, and that's the thing. It's like Sauron with the ring. Like it's like they're like made for each other, and they would not have hesitated to use them. And just like have dominion over all. Like
Right.
it would have been the end of the war, right? It would have been the end of everything. And yeah, it's crazy to think about. And I don't know if the ring sort of represents that here in the book to me, even though Tolkien may disagree. Yeah. Anyway, so Sam comes in, finds Frodo. The orc falls down the hatch and breaks his neck. And I thought it was a tender moment. Literally cradles him like a child and sort of wakes him up and is there for him. And their friendship is just so true and so heartwarming. And continues. And I think it's so important too, because it has to be to stand up to what they have to go through. And even here we see Frodo sort of turn on him for a second when he says, "Oh, I have the ring, I've been carrying it for you." And he says like, "Oh, you thief." And he accuses him of being a thief and all this stuff. And then he apologizes, but we can see that the ring's effect has twisted his mind in some ways.
Right.
And
even the most resilient of people that we've come to realize are these hobbits. Like even they eventually, just as Gollum was, just as every Bilbo was, over time, like it just gets to you. You cannot withstand it for all that long. And so Frodo's, he's gotten to the point where he can't refuse it anymore, and he can't stop himself. And yeah, that's like a heartbreaking moment when Frodo snaps on him and like kind of does the same thing that Bilbo does to Frodo in Rivendell.
All right, chapter 2 is called The Land of Shadow. Sam and Frodo make their way into Mordor, and they are captured by an orc company. So again, this is them traveling through this just like barren, bleak, twisted countryside of Mordor, and it's so bad. And at one point, he even says like, "I don't know how Sauron feeds his armies." And
right.
I was like, that's a good question.
Yeah. Well, they're like, do they even eat? And I think
Yeah.
Frodo or Sam, one of the two, says like, of course they eat. They're, Sauron he can't like manifest this evil and like do all this stuff. He has to manipulate others into doing it. So of course they're actual beings that need to eat and all that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and he has these like cisterns of water periodically that they end up drinking out of, where they can get water and stuff. So yeah, they do seem to have some actual, biological needs that are being addressed. They're basically disguised as orcs at this point. They dress up like orcs to hide as they're going into Mordor, because that's all that there is around here are orcs. And at some point they get picked up by this slave driver who thinks that they're like deserters, and he gets them back in line, and they're walking, and he says, "Where there's a whip, there's a will, my slugs," which I thought was an interesting line. And he, I don't know, he's just, whenever I get these orcs with having some personality and having some lines, it always surprises me a little bit. I know we have those moments in the movie too, but I feel like there may be fewer of them.
Yeah, I mean, seeing the orcs as not these like mindless, faceless creatures, I think adds to sort of everything that goes on in the story, because it is there are people dying, like they are like living beings that are for the cause of Sauron,
which
have been
kind
manipulated.
of muddies the water a little bit, especially when you start thinking about the ones that are slaves who are being driven to fight against their will.
Right.
But I think this is also something we get more of in the extended versions of the movies, I should also say, because these are a lot of the scenes that get cut, right? Like little moments of the orcs talking amongst themselves. Like those are often the things that get cut.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot in the extended. There's honestly very few, there are obviously changes, but there's a lot of the stuff that if you love the books, you got to watch the extended versions, because it's like almost everything there. Yeah. And that's
we will be watching that. And then once again, a skirmish breaks out at the end of this chapter. It's just a lot. It's a long, brutal walk. There's a lot being done to just drive home how just difficult the terrain is, how tired they are, how their morale is sinking,
right.
and how Sam is like continuing to be the one to convince Frodo to continue going.
When they get pulled into this marching formation, we've already seen Frodo almost unable to travel for very long. Like he has to rest constantly. They need to drink, and then they get brought into this company, and I think it's like 12 miles or something. They talk about they go, and the entire time Frodo's like falling over, like about to, like he can't make it. And even says like Sam says like I didn't think I was gonna be able to make it much longer. I can't believe Frodo's still going. And then they collapse down, and then they have to crawl away. And like just the effort, the way that Tolkien describes the effort that it takes to crawl away from sort of that dog pile into like this like trench area where they end up hiding. You can just tell how exhausted they are. You're like, God, if they could just get like 12 hours of sleep and some food and some water, they could make this journey, but they have to make it as quickly as possible, and it's so dangerous of an area. And I'm sure that has something to do with like war as well, right? Like, so in war, it's like if you could just get a good night's rest, some food and some water, it's like a godsend. And just thinking about the chaos, never knowing if you're safe.
Well, and just how tired you are when you're on the front lines too, right? Like, because famously, in these trenches, there's just artillery shells exploding all night, and you're trying to sleep not only with the noise, but with the knowledge that at any moment, if you have bad luck, an artillery shell could come into the trench and kill you.
Right.
And just imagine trying to sleep in that situation, and people are doing that, day in and day out, and yeah, I definitely think Tolkien was remembering his times in the war for these points here. There is a moment where the Nazgul in the air like let out a screech, and they can tell, and Sam has a sort of a moment where he says like, something has happened, something big has happened, and we get told through sort of the omniscient narrator that this is when the Witch King was killed in combat. So it's interesting to see how connected they all are and how they instantly know when something like that happens, even so far away. Like the all of Mordor seems to know about it. So, and then, yeah, once again, like we said, there's a skirmish that breaks out as these like different orc factions are trying to get in through a gate, and they just start fighting and killing each other. And we're seeing a lot of this like sort of infighting. And I wonder if that's being driven by the fact that maybe they've lost some battles, and maybe all is not as unified, or it could just be that that's how orcs are, which I think Sam even says at one point, like that's just how these orcs are, and that they would put aside their differences and kill us if they knew we were here.
Right. There's that moment when they see like a scout and like a warrior together, orcs, and like they end up turning on each other and killing. One of them kills the other. I think the scout kills the warrior, and Sam is just like, if only each orc would kill another orc, we'd only have to fight half as many. And so it's just interesting to think that they're always fighting each other, seemingly, whenever we see them, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it shows the disorder in the ranks, and sort of like you said, like if your motivations are bad, you're going to get situations like this. So now we get into chapter 3, which is the final chapter we covered, called Mount Doom. And this chapter is about the ascent of Mount Doom and the final confrontation. It starts off with Sam really realizing that there's no return for them. He says it's the first time he's realized that this is the end. That once they get there, if they're successful, they're going to die because they don't have enough supplies, they don't have enough strength. There's no way they're getting back. And he has this moment where he's like sort of defeated, but then he finds this inner strength, and he finds that he gets really stern and his will hardens, and he's like, if this is the task at hand, this is the job, then we're going to do it.
Right.
I thought that was an interesting sort of introspective moment for him.
Yeah. And just the will of Sam, and like the meager beginnings, and like what he represents to the story. All of this is why Sam is my favorite character in Lord of the Rings, because he represents like the everyman, but at the same time shows the most courage you could possibly show for anyone in the entire story, and shows that like we've talked about how he represses the pull to the ring. He freely gives Frodo the ring when he asks for it. It's not like he has any sort of pull where he's like, my precious, yet, although he hasn't had it for that long. But this moment where he just like solidifies, like, if I die, it's for the cause that we've been on, the journey that we've been on this whole time. And the way that he's it always strikes me, and it's always gives me goosebumps when he decides that Frodo can no longer walk on his own, and he just says like, I'm gonna carry him, and he decides to carry him. And there's this moment where Sam realizes,
I may not be able to carry the ring, but I can carry you. He says a little more than that in the book, but
in the book, yeah. But this moment of, while he's carrying him, he has this realization that like he's not as heavy as he thought he would be, as Frodo.
Yeah.
And I think it's this idea that like he's decided what his goal is. Like, he's decided like, I'm going to finish this. And I think he thought that like carrying Frodo and the ring at the same time, he would feel the burden of the ring, but it's seemingly only the ring bearer feels the burden, while he can somewhat like, he's just carrying a hobbit on his back. There's no sort of like
who's very
weight
thin and
from the ring.
malnourished. Yeah,
right. So I just a overall really affecting moment and scene for me.
There is another moment where Sam offers to carry the ring for a while, and Frodo has another kind of freak out moment of, you can't have it, you can't, and it's the ring sort of twisting him, and we see Frodo is just in a really bad way right now. Like, he's not only is he tired and thirsty and hungry and all that, but he also, the weight of the ring is getting heavier and heavier as the closer they get. Like, it's defending itself in a way, and it wants desperately for him not to be able to get there. And then, we get the moment where Sam carries Frodo, because Frodo doesn't have the strength to go on any further. And really, I think we talked about this early on in our coverage, but like it took these two together. Like, let's not have not make any mistake. Sam couldn't have done this by himself. It's his love of another person, I think, too. You know what I mean? Like, if he was just himself trying to do this, I don't think he'd be able to do it. It's the fact that he cares more about Frodo than he does the ring, destroying the ring. He cares more about Frodo than he does the mission, I think. Right. And I think that's one of the reasons that gives him so much strength here and why they're able to do this together. And
that's why I think ultimately that it's one of the most enduring and just sort of memorable friendships in a story. It's just this the journey that they've gone through together. They've been through war together.
And then enter Gollum, right? He tackles Sam. They fight, but ultimately Gollum is bested, and this sort of rouses Frodo to continue on, and he ends up leaving Sam and Gollum, who are fighting together. Frodo goes off to complete the mission on his own, and then Sam says, finally I'm going to kill you, and he prepares to kill Gollum, but ends up having mercy and deciding not to kill him. And again, this is a moment of, Sam has every right. Like, he's been provoked many times. Gollum keeps coming back and fucking with them. It seems like the move, but he, mercy stays his hand, and he thinks about after carrying the ring a while for himself, he can really think about how it's affected Gollum and the way it's weighed on his mind. And, he ends up sparing him and then follows after Frodo, and they enter the final room of Mount Doom, chasm, or whatever it is.
The number of times we've heard Sam say, if I got my hands on him, I would kill him, about Gollum, and every time, I think he goes out scouting at one point to find water and sees the shadow of Gollum, and he's like, if only I could get to him. So he constantly says how much he just wishes he could kill Gollum, and then given the opportunity, shows mercy, which again I think is a sign of wisdom in these stories for Tolkien, because we see Gandalf, we see Aragorn, and now we see Sam show mercy to the enemy, which I think not only takes courage but takes I think it takes giving someone an opportunity to change themselves. And I think that's right. Part of mercy, and
in a roundabout way, it ends up saving Frodo's life, but
right.
And saving the day. But it's hard to say that it was planned or any, you know what I mean? It seems completely random, but also fated in a way. Seems like Gandalf foretold this basically when he said he may have yet have a part to play before this is over.
Yeah.
So in this final room, Frodo has this moment where he turns around and says, I've come all this way, but I'm not going to complete this. I'm not going to throw the ring in. It's mine. I've earned it at this point. And so we see even Frodo, after all of this, the ring bests him. It's the sheer power of this ring is more powerful than any one person, I think, right? And I think that's on display here. And it seems that Frodo did as best as one person could possibly do, and that's to get it to the very brink. And that's through the help of Sam. And then Gollum strikes, and Frodo goes invisible, but Gollum lands on him, and they have this battle where he's invisible. And then we see Gollum bite down, and in a moment that I remember the first time I saw it was on the animated film when I was a little kid, and the bites his finger off, and it was one of the most brutal things I'd ever seen at that point. I was very young, and so I always remember that moment, and I'm excited to watch that animated film again for our bonus episode. And I was thinking of that again, takes the ring, says, I got my precious, basically gets his ring back, but then he just kind of trips. He just kind of trips and falls in, which I can't remember how it plays out in the movie, but I feel like it's a little different. But just on his own, trips and falls into the fire. And there's a great moment where Sauron realizes his folly. I just thought that was so cool, and like looks back at the mountain and goes, "Oh shit," and he's made a big mistake.
Right, yeah. Underestimating, sort of, I think, based on the fact that his forces knew that there were like little hobbits in Mordor, you would think he'd be like at least somewhat focused, but I think, and I don't know if we mentioned this, but seemingly Aragorn and Gandalf thought that Sauron would assume, since Aragorn has taken the throne, they thought that Sauron would assume that Aragorn had the ring and he was coming to Mordor to fight using the power from the ring. So that's kind of why Sauron's gaze was there and wasn't really worried about hobbits in Mordor. But yeah, this scene, it's like the moment of Frodo denying throwing the ring into the fire, into the lava, into Mordor. It's also a tragedy because like Sam took him to this point, you know what I mean? Sam got him all the way there. And he says to Sam, like, I don't care, it's mine. Like, I'm not throwing it into the fire. And ultimately, like, Sam, there's nothing he could do about it at that point.
It's the I would say this is the black moment, to borrow a phrase from like storytelling theory. Mm-hmm. Like, this is the ultimate all is lost moment, because if Frodo is recanting his mission and saying that I'm not going to do it, like, it can't get any worse than that, right?
And I do want to say, like, as much as I think people give Frodo a lot of shit because of how tempted by the ring he was, but I think, like, clearly, I think we've talked about Sam as the greatest hero in the story, I would say. But the fact that Frodo was able to withstand the call of the ring to the point that he would deny the quest all the way up until getting to the fires is really, not only dramatic, but like it's a huge character trait for him as well. Like, clearly he's brave and clearly he's a hero that's overcome so much, and then to see him in the last moment,
I think he does as well as anybody could right. Honestly. I think anyone, and I think Tolkien's trying to say here that it takes more than that. It takes teamwork, it takes friendship, it takes two people and some luck to overcome this thing.
And not to mention Gollum representing sort of the being so not knowing where he's at, you know what I mean? Being so enthralled by the ring that he doesn't realize that he's about to die, because he's too stupid to realize that, because he's so drawn to the ring, he's too dumb to realize that he's at the cliffside as he pulls the ring away and falls in, or just too engaged with,
focused on can't see his surroundings, doesn't realize what's happening,
right?
And ultimately maybe doesn't even care. Like, it's more important that he gets the ring than anything else, whether or not he dies at the end, I don't know. If it's, maybe it is a moment of peace for him. And then, literally there is an earthquake, there's towers collapsing, there's mountains falling.
It erupts, right? Mount Doom erupts as well.
Mount Doom erupts, and the Nazgul are like killed as they're flying. They come flying back, and then they like burn up in the sky. As this is all happening, like all the Nazgul die. So this is the big off switch. This is destroying the army here. And I wanted to take a moment and say that I also thought it was interesting that we don't get sort of a video game style final boss fight here, right? Like, Sauron is not the final boss that is fought in this book. In fact, he doesn't ever really take the field, he is much more of the general commanding the armies from way in the back, and that's how Sauron operates here. It's
part of the reason why I think Sauron's such an imposing, enemy or antagonist, because he's corporeal, right? He's not tangible. He's not there.
Well, he's not incorporeal.
Yeah, he's incorporeal. You're right. The fact that he's not tangible, the fact that he's not there, and can't be attacked, can't be killed in that way, and that he's sort of like always going to be there. Unless, you can strike him down, but he's always going to be there trying to linger around, seemingly.
I did think it was interesting at one point, I think it was Gandalf maybe, or Aragorn, one of the two, was saying that, like, even if he's defeated, there will come, he's not all evil. It's clear that, like, even though he is the representation of evil right now, he is not himself all evil in the world.
Within the if you look at the larger context of the lore of Lord of the Rings, Sauron is just one of the kind of world conquering evil beings. You know what I mean? He's not the incarnation of evil. Like there are things above him, and
like he's not the devil or something.
Right. He's as much as it seems like he could be. He isn't like the manifestation of.
He's more like
itself.
Hitler.
Yeah, he's more like Hitler. He's more like Magic Hitler.
So Frodo then recalls Gandalf's words about Gollum playing a role, and he's sort of like the burden is lifted from him, right? And he tells Sam like we should forgive Gollum for what happened, because if anybody understands how much the ring can twist your mind, it's Frodo.
Right.
And then we get what I think might be the greatest line in all of the Lord of the Rings, and possibly making it one of the greatest lines in all of fantasy. Do you know which line I'm talking about?
Is it the at the end of all things with the
quote, "I'm glad you're here with me, here at the end of all things, Sam." And I can't remember if that gets changed a little bit in the movie or not, but the essence is still the same. It's this moment of friendship, and they think that it's over. They're going to die. They're on this mountainside. Everything's erupting. And it's Frodo recognizing the role that I think Sam has played in all of this. And I just think it's a really powerful moment.
And also, I think like re-establishing himself outside of the ring.
Yeah, I am free of it now. This is me, the real Frodo, right? Like your friend that you know from before. And I am here to say that, I'm glad it's you.
To me, it's always been one of my favorite moments, just because it's like, it is at the end of all things. Like what could be more sort of satisfying than being with someone that you care that much about at the end of all things? Because ultimately, like, it's not about the rings of power. It's not about all these other things. It's about being with somebody like that and knowing that like you guys were there for each other. So just amazing stuff.
Really good. And it's weird. It feels like it's the end of the book. But like I said, there is more to it. We have, I think like 6 more chapters. And then we have the appendices. I know the Scouring of the Shire is a thing I've heard about that is not in the film that I am excited to read. I know a little bit about what goes on in it, but I've never read it before. So I'm going to be getting into that next week. And we'll really put the sort of cap on this. We'll get through the denouement as everybody's heading back and the story's getting sort of wrapped up. So we hope you join us again next week for that.
Yeah, definitely write in and give us any sort of like closing things if you wanted to kind of check in with us. And it'll be a good way for us to wrap out all of the Lord of the Rings, this trilogy here. I think we'll revisit Middle-earth with The Hobbit eventually, but just if you wanted to get any thoughts in, anything we've said, anything you disagree with, agree with, just, how the journey struck you, if you've been along with us over these couple of years that we've covered these 3 books. I think it'll be a fun last episode, and it'll be cool to have some of the context of the appendices to pull from as well.
Absolutely. We just wanted to thank one of our new patrons, and that's Harry C. He signed up and is going to be one of our new patrons this coming month. So we're excited for that. And we are going to be putting out 2 bonus episodes, like we said, Tolkien, the film, and the animated Return of the King. So if you're interested in that, definitely check out our Patreon. It's patreon.com/inktofilm. And think about giving us a couple bucks, and it can really help out, especially in these trying times. Yeah, and thank you to Harry for becoming a new patron. If you wanted to connect with us, we're on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of those at Inktofilm. Join our Council of Inklings. It's a great way to stay connected. We post polls for upcoming projects, any sort of adaptation news we see, any potential projects. We like to stay updated with that kind of stuff, and it's a cool way for us all to interact over there. So check that out. And if you like this episode, please let us know in the form of a rating and review on whatever podcast app you use. Helps us get the word out and get more people listening to our show. Thank you to Music Archive for the use of our intro and outro music. And thank you to Annalisa and Caitlin for providing a little voiceover work this week. Yeah, I hope everybody enjoyed our April Fool's intro. Okay, so that wraps up this episode. We will be back next week covering the last third in the appendices of Return of the King. We hope you guys are safe out there. We hope your families are safe. Keep on washing those hands and stay in quarantine if at all possible. But yeah, we're pulling for you guys. yeah, stay healthy. My heart goes out to all of the healthcare workers, and shout out to everybody else who's considered an essential business and doing the grocery work and the delivery work and all the other very important things that are sort of keeping society together right now. You're doing important work, and we wish that you got paid and got all of the healthcare and everything else associated with such important work. So until next time.
Thanks for listening.